All right, good evening, everybody. Sorry, that was a little bit louder than expected. So thank you very much for coming. I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Jennifer Love, and I am the Senior Advisor to the Provost on Women Faculty, and I'm also a professor in the Chemistry Department here at UBC Vancouver. So I'd like to thank you for coming tonight and to welcome you to tonight's discussion, Lead, Succeed, and Inspire. And this event is being held in recognition of International Women's Day and also the International Day for Elimination of Racism, both of which are in March. So UBC as a university has a responsibility and commitment to expanding our understanding of critical issues that are facing society. And we're pleased to convene this event as an opportunity to foster dialogue, to share knowledge, and to hopefully inspire change at UBC and beyond. But before we begin the event, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. So this event is in partnership between Alumni UBC and UBC's Equity and Inclusion Office. And over the last 18 months, there have been a number of events that have been jointly hosted on current and topical subjects. And so again, thank you for carving out some time to be part of tonight's discussions. So we're also thrilled to welcome you all to the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center. This is the home for alumni life. My building is right next to here, so it's very convenient for me. The alumni community is now over 325,000 people strong, and this spans 140 countries, so very, very international. Since May of last year, we've been celebrating a significant milestone, which is Alumni UBC 100, and that's the 100th birthday of Alumni UBC. So we're celebrating the power of the global community with an ambitious goal to have 100,000 alumni connections during this centennial year. You can find more about the ways to take part in that at alumni.ubc.ca. Tonight's conversation is currently being live streamed, and a recording of the evening's program will be made available on the Alumni UBC digital library, as well as the Equity and Inclusion Office's events webpage. And so a special thanks to our webcast partner, the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, for providing the live stream. Now, if anyone has ever had me as a professor in their class, you'll know that the first thing I tell you to do is turn off your mobile phones. In fact, I'm going to say the exact opposite tonight. And so we'd actually like you to live tweet the event. I've already tweeted about it. And you can use, it's probably up here, the hashtag of alumni at Alumni UBC and at Equity UBCV, and use the hashtag Changemakers. So we're also going to be using an audience engagement platform to include everybody in the conversation. If anyone had gone to We for She in November, you'll notice it's the same web-based platform, slido.com. So I'll just walk you through how to use it if you'd like. You can feel free to pull out a tablet or mobile phone. And so you just go to slido.com, and then you'll be asked to put in a password, which is just the hashtag Changemakers. And so that allows you to sign in. So I'm supposed to pause and let you do that if you'd like. So the platform allows you to ask questions and comment in real time. So you can input questions in a couple of different ways. There's a little ask button, or there's a slot where you can just type in your question. And then you can like other people's questions. Typical social media, you just give it the thumbs up. And so what that allows to do, the moderator in the Q&A portion will be able to look at the questions that are the most liked and address those first. If you'd like to address a question to a particular panelist, then just type in their name first, followed by your question. So again, the URL is slido.com, and the hashtag is Changemakers. So we'll also be sharing the URL and hashtag on the slide deck throughout the program. And then as well, if there are questions from the audience, we'll be passing around a microphone. So before tonight's important discussion begins, it's absolutely my pleasure to introduce to the stage a special guest and UBC alumna. So we're delighted to have the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould here. The Honourable Wilson-Raybould is Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. She's a Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville, a lawyer and advocate, and former Regional Chief of the BC Assembly of Nations.
Well, good evening, everyone. Gaila Kasla. Thank you to Jennifer, Dr. Love, for the introduction and for welcoming me here to UBC, which is not a challenge for me. I love coming back to UBC. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I appreciate being invited and thank Alumni UBC and UBC Equity and Inclusion Office for the invitation to what I think is an amazing title for discussion with amazing panelists, Lead, Succeed, and Inspire, an evening with Changemakers. I just recently got back from a tour of the United States, of the Netherlands, and Germany, where I was doing a number of things, but also over there to celebrate International Women's Day. So to come back here and be able to speak with all of you about International Women's Day, about being involved and creating change, particularly here at UBC. And I went to school at the law school and graduated in 1999. It seems like forever ago, but incredibly pleased to be back. So I was asked to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to be standing here and what has motivated me and led me through my life. So I'm going to condense my story a little bit, recognizing that I'm standing here as the 51st Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, as the Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville, and the first Minister of Justice and Attorney General who is Indigenous. And with that, I wanted to also acknowledge the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly here at UBC, the Musqueam Nation. So in terms of my story, the short version of my story, one that starts with and continues through the teachings of my grandmother, is I was taught to believe in myself, to know where I come from, and I was told that if I worked hard and if I had a plan, that I could achieve anything I wanted to in this life that I put my mind to. That's the short version. A little bit of a longer version to that. I am incredibly proud to come from the Muskama, Zawadanuk, and Likwikta people of northern Vancouver Island, part of the Kwakwakiwak people, the Kwakwala-speaking peoples. We are a matrilineal society. Our descent is traced and property is inherited through the female line. My grandmother and my parents all ensured that both my sister and I, also a UBC alum, knew our culture, our values, the laws of our big house, and how to conduct ourselves as leaders. We are a potlatching people. This is our system of government. In our system, there are no political parties, which is kind of nice. Rather, we govern through principles of consensus, and where the role of leaders is to seek that consensus. We meet, and while everyone may not agree on every aspect, we debate the issues and seek general agreement to help ensure that decisions are balanced, supported, and enduring to stand the test of time. One of my roles in the big house is Haliglasti, a role that's always held by women, which can be translated loosely as one who corrects the chief's path. We show them the way, a metaphor for life, and in our potlatch system, the power of the chief is symbolically tamed and he becomes ready to lead. So my grandmother always used to joke that when it came to the respective roles of men and women in our society, women were simply too busy and too important to be chiefs. It's kind of a joke, but not really. In our culture and our traditions emphasize that everyone had a role to play in the community to ensure that the community functions well. The roles are very different but equally important to ensure that society functions the way that it should. Further, our system emphasized balance between men and women, between clans, and between tribes. Society that does not treat men and women or people generally with the same respect will never fulfill its full potential. In my nation's world, I do not think that we would have survived. Both my grandmother and my father, who is also a UBC alum, the second Indigenous person to graduate from law school, were both strong advocates for Indigenous rights in Canada. So when I think back, I never questioned my path, that my path would take me to university to study the law because it was something that was already predetermined. I was raised to know that I had something to give back, something to contribute. My upbringing, my education, my professional and personal experiences have all helped shape my worldview. So fast forward 4 years ago or so, it was not my intention to run for federal office, but I became convinced that we needed a government that would take the steps necessary to advance an even more inclusive society, one that respects our country's diversity, and in particular, the place of Indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities. I am incredibly honored to have been elected the MP for Vancouver-Granville. And as I said in this very room, the partition wasn't there, a couple of years ago, and it bears repeating. While I see my appointment as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada as certainly a personal accomplishment, I viewed it and view it not so much as a reflection on me personally, but more as a symbol about how Canada is changing. As a person against whom the laws of Canada have discriminated, and to a certain degree still do, and one who fought for years against those laws, it is remarkable to think that I am now the principal lawyer in charge of administering those laws and am responsible for advising the government. And we are making changes. One of the most invigorating aspects of being a lawyer, an activist, and now the Minister of Justice and Attorney General has been working to correct what I see as imbalance in Canadian society. I believe in finding balance between a diversity of views and balance between the competing rights of individuals in democracy, including women, Indigenous peoples, and other minorities. Through this lens, we've been able to grapple with some of our most complex issues, from medical assistance in dying, to gender identity and expression, to criminal justice reform, national security and privacy, to Indigenous rights recognition and reconciliation, to name a few. And our work continues. I strongly believe that good decisions, good policy, and good governance are born from dialogue and informed debate, where divergent voices are embraced and listened to. It is only by ensuring that all Canadians are at the table that we can create a fairer, more compassionate and caring Canada. Well-informed, inclusive policy increases a society's chances to meet the needs of all of its people and sustaining long-term economic development, which will benefit us all. These are the teachings of the Big House. Inclusiveness is a fundamental tenet or key value in democratic polities, so that all voices have a role in decision-making, whether defined by gender, ethnicity, religion, region, economic status, age, sexual orientation, or education. For many years, I worked alongside amazing leaders who fought for changes in Canada's laws and policies regarding Indigenous peoples and others, who fought for a more just society. And now it is my immense pleasure and responsibility to do this very work as the Minister and Attorney General. Without the efforts of so many before me, I would not be standing before you. Okay, so that's a bit of a longer, short version of my story. And there's a long version of my story, but I don't have time to tell it. But I will say that there are many challenges and many successes, many tears and many smiles and joys in and amongst my long story. But I know, standing here, this is where I'm supposed to be. So I want to thank each of you for being here, because I know this is where you're supposed to be, for being here today. And thanks for the roles that you play, doing your part in your own spheres of influence in creating a more just, more inclusive, and more compassionate society. Through strong advocates, we will strengthen our communities, our country, and beyond. And each of us, in our own way, I believe, is haligilasti, correcting the path. We each have an important role to play in guiding the path forward, in helping our societies find balance and flourish. And in recognition of International Women's Day and the upcoming day for the elimination of racial discrimination, which I believe should be every day, I invite all of you to join me in working towards a true social diversity and inclusion. Together we can correct the imbalance. We can ensure that we have a fair and just society, and ensure that the voices that haven't been heard are heard loudly and clearly. Kela Kasa, thank you for listening to me, and I very much look forward to hearing the amazing stories, short or long, of the panelists that are coming up. Thank you very much.
So huge thank you to the Minister for coming out tonight and getting this conversation started with a very inspiring commentary. I did see a longer version at We for She, actually. So, so now I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, and that's Anita Bathe. And she is the lead reporter for CBC News at 6 p.m. She takes viewers through some of the most important stories happening around Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley every night. She is an award-winning journalist for coverage of breaking news, and I'll just list some of her recent awards. 2 local BC Association of Broadcaster Awards, 2 local RTDNA, Radio Television Digital News Association Awards, a national RTDNA award, and the Jack Webster Fellowship. So please join me in welcoming Anita tonight.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Minister, for that. That was wonderful. On a daily basis, we're reminded of the importance and value of creating space for dialogue on gender and racial equality as a vehicle for creating and sustaining meaningful change. I am super excited to be here tonight. We've already started off with 2 wonderful women standing up here, and we are going to hear some pretty incredible perspectives today, and I'm really excited to be here to hear from our changemakers about what it takes to lead, succeed, inspire, and of course, change. Here to discuss this topic with us are 4 of our panelists. I'd like to welcome them to the stage. So all the way to my right, we have Dr. Nora Angelis. She's an associate professor at the School of Community and Regional Planning and the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice at UBC. She's also a faculty research associate at the UBC Centre for Human Settlements. Her research and interests are on community and international development studies and social policy, participatory planning and governance, participatory action research, and the politics of transnational feminist networks, women's movements, and agrarian issues, particularly in the Southeast Asian region. Welcome. Next to her, we have Patricia Barkaskas. Patricia is a UBC alum twice over with a master's in history and a JD with law and social justice specialization. She is the academic director of the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic and an instructor at the Peter A. Allard School of Law. She has worked closely with Indigenous peoples in their encounters with the justice system and has worked for residential school survivors as an historical legal researcher for the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Her research interests include access to justice, clinical legal education, and decolonizing and indigenizing law. Patricia is also Métis from Alberta. And next to Patricia, our third panelist is Cicely Blaine. Cicely is also a UBC alumni and a writer, facilitator, activist, and artist from London, UK. Cicely's passion rests in social justice through anti-oppressive education, offering a range of services that aim to inspire, empower, and encourage participants to make change within their community for greater inclusivity, accessibility, and justice. Cicely's experience stems from their work as a founder of Black Lives Matter Vancouver. With years of experience working within LGBTQ and marginalized communities, Cicely supports people and their organizations to create meaningful change for their students, clients, and employees. And last, but of course not least, we have Sushma Dutt. Sushma was recently recognized as one of the 150 most influential British Columbians by the Vancouver Sun. She began building her name as a broadcaster in the 60s, a definite challenge in an industry that was predominantly male. Some of those challenges still exist. Today, she is the owner and operator of IT Media Broadcasting, a company that holds 2 radio stations and produces multiple TV shows for Shaw Multicultural Channel and Omni. Sushma has received numerous awards, including Business in Vancouver's 2007 Influential Women in Business Award, the Order of British Columbia, and the Queen's Golden and Diamond Jubilee commemorative medals. Please join me in welcoming everybody here tonight. So I know Jennifer already mentioned this, but as I chat with our panelists on stage, we'll start out with some questions that we have prepared, but please feel free to submit your audience questions. Hopefully you've downloaded the app, and I will try to get to the most popular questions after we go through a few other ones. Ready for this, guys? All right, so you were all asked to be on this panel this evening because you are change makers in society. I want to talk about how you think you become seen as a change maker. What is your story? Let's start with you, Nora.
I am a firstborn daughter in a large family, in a large clan. And I was told at a very young age that, you've got a good head. You've got a good heart. You're not very tall, wearing heels. You've got dark skin, darker than your cousins. And, you cannot really do much about your minuses. Nothing. But you could do a lot about your pluses. It helped a lot that I had a brother with Down syndrome, now 48 years old, with severe mental disabilities. And I think it really helped me develop at a young age the power of empathy. And being firstborn daughter who takes charge, especially when my parents are not around, it really helped me understand at a very young age what is it that I can do and do well, and the things that I am really not interested in and could not really do very well. So being able to self-assess what is it I'm good at and I'm not good at. And to put it in academic terms, I have some predisposing factors in my life that led me to decide, not stumble into, but decide to become a change maker. This predisposing factors is the fact that I was born and raised in a peri-urban community there's a lot of conflict and social inequality and poverty. 2, I was my mom's early helper in our farm supply store and forced me to mingle with ordinary people from all walks of life. Farmers, carpenters, school teachers. And I was lucky enough to go to the top university in the Philippines, where in the days when the campus was red hot with student activism and became part of the student movement. And I'd say, fourthly, an unplanned move to Canada as an immigrant, which introduced me to new opportunities for taking action. Now, those predisposing factors were enabled and reinforced. So I have now my reinforcing and enabling factors. So transitioning from the student movement to the women's movement and being able to see interconnection, and this was in the early 1980s, seeing the connection between different interests and needs of farmer and fisher folk. Remember, I grew up in a rice farming area and became a project manager of the Congress for People's Agrarian Reform that led to the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law during the time of President Corazon Aquino, which followed the Marcos dictatorship. And I also helped pioneer through my transitioning from the student movement to the women's movement, became part of one of the first women's groups to call itself feminist, to help pioneer women's and gender studies in 3 universities, colleges in the Philippines. And then as a new immigrant in Canada, being involved with immigrant and Filipino communities in various Canadian cities. And I would say that the last important factor would be being in higher education and deciding at an early age that I really wanted to be an educator. And I was very fortunate I did not waste time, knowing that need and interest and identity really leads to community building. And for me, I've always gone by that guiding light that you really, as Jody was telling us earlier, you really need to know who you are, your identity and your values, and the communities to which you belong and you connect. And use the talents and resources and whatever, privileges you have, big and small, to contribute to good change. So that's my story.
Joshua, I see you nodding your head quite a bit.
You're going by height now?
You said it, not me.
Yeah, I listening to her, beautiful. I come from a family which was, 6 siblings, born in Africa. And, I was an average student. In fact, my parents were very worried that I probably will never graduate. So when I was in grade 7, my dad told me that if I did not graduate in grade 7, because then you go to high school, they're going to take me to India and get me married. So I was like petrified, okay, I've got to study. So I passed grade 7 and then life was the same, you bum around in school and all that, So came to senior Cambridge and the grades weren't that good, and so then my father showed me this picture of a guy. We were going to go to India anyway from Africa. And he said, you fail, this is your future. And it looked very bleak. So needless to say, I studied very hard and I passed. So I didn't marry that guy. And lived in India for about 3 years. I graduated from there. Parents couldn't live there. We were foreigners in India. So we went to England. And in England, I thought, I'm an Indian, so I'll probably get a job in the Indian High Commission. So I walked in there and they asked me if I knew how to type. So no, I didn't very well. So they said, why don't you practice and then come back? So I was rather disappointed that I did not get a job with them. And right next door was the British Broadcasting Corporation's overseas office. So I went in there and filled in my application, gave it to them, and a week later got a letter from them saying, come for an interview. So what I'd done was I had written my name and the languages I knew, and then the typing speed that I didn't have, I wrote it in the column of Hindi, and they were looking for a Hindi typist. And so I got an interview, and it was the weirdest interview. So they were talking about a Hindi typewriter which doesn't have fixed keyboard, and I'm thinking, I did go to college and they did teach me at Polytechnic how to type, and it has fixed keyboard, I don't know what this old woman is talking about. Anyway, I realized that Hindi doesn't have a fixed keyboard. So when they showed me the typewriter, I said, oh yeah, I remember mine is totally different. And so I fibbed my way through it. And I got a job as a Hindi typist with the BBC. But my future boss knew that I was, fibbing, but they were looking for 2 years for a Hindi typist. So they thought, she's got good education, she's a Mahavidushi, which is BA in India. So I'm giving you 6 months to learn. And if you pass this test, then you would work with us. But my passion was broadcasting, because I was 10 years old when I first went into a radio station. And I was supposed to say one liner, and I fluffed it. And so the guy made me repeat it. And then when the drama came on air, the fluff wasn't there. It was clean. So I thought to myself, what a magical world. You make mistakes and then you can erase them. So BBC was my place.
Well, it sounds like with the two of you, it's all about finding your passion, and
Yes.
once you find your passion and what you're good at,
That's it.
that's how you take off.
Yes.
Is that the same for you, Patricia?
Yeah, I guess so. Growing up, I was always told that I had the opportunity and should make the opportunities for myself to find my passion and to use that to try to make change in the world. It was very important to my family that I used my position, whatever it was going to be, to try to make the world a better place for people. And I think that had a lot to do for me with growing up with an older sister with who was born developmentally delayed and who later developed schizophrenia, and then a younger adopted brother who had FASD. And so that helped me develop a lot of empathy at a young age, and really made me want to channel that passion into change in the world and make it a better place. And I think that I took a long time to sort of find where that passion was best expressed in teaching and in practicing law. I had some, interesting journeys along the way. But when I finally did sort of find the place where I was able to bring that passion to bear in a very real way in the lives of people every day, so that I could help in their struggle for social justice, that felt like the right place.
So again, still on the same theme, finding that right place and the passion that you have.
Yeah.
Cicely, what about you?
I was so engrossed in everyone else's stories, I forgot who I think, listening to you folks talking, when I reflect about my own journey to be where I am now, I think it's a lot, for me growing up, it was a lot more about rage than it was about passion. And I think growing up in an urban environment in Southeast London, in a predominantly black area, a lot of people were experiencing unemployment and not very good access to education and healthcare, and there was just a lot of frustration and a lot of anger, and so many people wondering, what can we do to change the system, what can we do to fix things? And that was something that was also instilled in me by my family, and I come from a family of activists who are always trying to do their best to make change, and particularly through through education, and that's something that I've followed in a less traditional sense. But yeah, I think I've always been grappling with how to turn that frustration and that anger into something positive, and I think, yeah, that's kind of what led me to where I am now.
So you all say that you come from families that encouraged you to find what you love or to make change in the world. What about for people who don't come from families like that, who don't have that encouragement behind them? Cicely, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's so important for me to work on community building, to try to bring people together, and that was one of my inspirations for founding Black Lives Matter in Vancouver, because I think, as many people unfortunately don't know, there is a history of Black communities in Vancouver being erased and being kind of undone in ways that mean in the present day it's really hard to build community, and it's really hard to find spaces where Black folks can come together in the same way that other cultures perhaps can, because there isn't that like physical location, or yeah, everybody's very spread out because of that history of displacement. So that was really a driving force behind founding Black Lives Matter and all other kinds of community building work that I and my friends and community members do, is kind of like, yeah, if you don't have that solid foundation, if you don't have that background of people who are really supportive and people who are able to help you drive change, where are you going to find that? And I think, yeah, it's been really important to me to be able to be that person for some people, and to be able to create those spaces where people find themselves and people feel seen.
Mm-hmm. I have to correct myself. I hope I didn't get the impression that my parents were social justice warriors. No, in fact, if you understand the mentality of colonized people, we have two sayings, you know, keep your head down, don't stick your neck out on the chopping board. And this is just really a coping strategy that my ancestors have learned through the years in order to survive. So I didn't really get that social justice from them. My father was a public servant, but none of them leaned into electoral public office, and they could have. And I often joke that if I do run for public office, I'll win because my surname starts with A, right? But for them, it's something that happens only if you're born in the right family, you know, in the right name. And this is because of the political culture in the Philippines. Is largely based on patronage, based on lineage, nepotism, and dynasty making, right? So, but I think if you do have a family that encourages you to address social inequality, go into good governance and public service, that's really an asset. And I think you do have to lean in and be part of it. But if you do come from more conservative family, but you are uncomfortable with it, I'd say that discomfort is actually your resource and your asset. Because you could also make your other family members uncomfortable. And that's certainly what I did with my own family. You know, coming out as a feminist, oh yeah, you're women's lib, my father would tell me, right? But I think it opened really his eyes that some of the things that he was saying when we were growing up were rather sexist, but permissible in a culture where that's normalized. So I'd say go for it. You know, regardless of what family you were born into.
Move on to a little bit of a different realm here. In your areas of expertise, what are some of the main issues that organizations, so we're talking government, media, law, universities, are struggling with in terms of being gender and race inclusive? Patricia, let's start with you.
Wow. So working as I do as the academic director at the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic, which is a program that's run through the law school here at UBC, through the Peter A. Allard School of Law, but is also a poverty pro bono legal clinic for Indigenous people located in the downtown east side, where we work quite closely with various other sort of legal actors, such as Crown Counsel and or often the City of Vancouver, if we're talking about bylaw disputes. I see a lot of different institutions at work as I'm working with folks from those institutions and or working within UBC itself. And I have to say that I think the biggest thing is institutions have to be open to change. They have to be able to look at their history of institutionalized racism, institutionalized gender inequality, institutionalized heteronormativity, and be willing to look at that and say, we're going to change that. And what are we going to do that? At the law school, we have a sort of category you can apply to if you are Indigenous in order to self-identify and apply as an Indigenous person, which means that we have right now over 50 Indigenous students at the law school, which is the largest cohort, as I understand it, in Canada. And I think that that makes a difference too, that when those people go out into the world and take up roles in the world as lawyers and or policy makers, they go into government, they find their place in the world, and then they become leaders. They become role models. They become the people that a young Métis girl in Alberta can look to as she's growing up and say, "Hey, I want to be, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada one day." Mm-hmm. Right? That's what it takes, is seeing people move forward into these positions and institutions doing the work to make sure that those positions are filled by people who reflect the diversity that Canada has now.
So it sounds like we're all on the right path toward that and seeing more organizations being open. What still needs to change? Shushma, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think in media, I've seen a lot of change. We've seen, when I first came here in the 70s, it was very difficult to see a brown face on television. Today, we've got some very accomplished broadcasters in this field. Even when I was in England, it was very difficult to get into a technical job, like program operations, studio manager. And when I came to Canada, it was very difficult to see a woman as a studio manager. CBC wasn't even here at that time. And the other radio stations probably had men working in those positions. But over the past 46 years, I've seen the change in my field, in the field of broadcasting. There is, to a certain extent, gender parity, but there is still a gap. There is a gap in the salary. No matter whether you see two hosts sitting, man and a woman, there would be a difference in their salary. As an employer, I try to make sure that in our community, in our station, that we have gender parity, that the pay scale is according to their qualification and their experience. And I think if all the organizations, including the government, started doing that, it would make life easier for everyone.
Do you have anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an issue of representation and of diversity, and I think not just diversity as a term that's become overused, but like being able to genuinely do that right. And kind of the thing that really sparked my interest in becoming a consultant around these issues is the big H&M scandal that happened recently. Right. And when I looked at it, I'm like, you just know there were no black people in the room when they were making those decisions. And and even if there were, they were not given the space to speak up because, kind of the thing you were mentioning, as colonized people, you're not really given the space to speak up, or you'd never feel confident. And so how can we change the way we look at diversity to be more about like empowering marginalized people, empowering women, empowering visible minorities to have access to spaces and to take up the space that they deserve. So not just having diversity as a kind of marketing tool or as a kind of like show, but like having diversity in the sense that folks feel represented, and then on top of that, they're able to genuinely do good work and feel valued for who they are.
Diversity so that it feels natural.
Yeah.
Intersectionality recognizes that certain groups of people have multi-layered facets in life that they have to deal with, such as racism and sexism. We've talked a lot about that, both issues. What are the extra challenges one would face with having to deal with multiple levels of bias? So yes, racism, sexism, anything else?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the word intersectionality, which seems like, a really big term. But the concept really has been used in other contexts to really refer to, I guess, interlocking identities, commonalities in forms of oppression and that people experience, be it class, gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, caste, language, base. It's something that I think is increasingly informing the way we think. Certainly in the 2 units when I'm cross-appointed at the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexual, and Social Justice and the School of Community and Regional Planning, we take an intersectional approach. And it's seeping through the City of Vancouver, for example, just came up with a request for proposal on how to integrate the intersectionality approach into all services, policies, and institutions of our own city. And I think it will be a trailblazer, once a handbook or a manual is done along those lines. How to operationalize it, I think, is really the challenge. Institutionally, in the policies that we do, to answer your earlier question, we're trying to come a long way as far as inclusion and diversity in CBC and certainly here at UBC. But we do still have, I think, room for improvement as far as hiring practices for faculty and staff. Like diversity also means different things in different contexts. Like for female-dominated occupations and professions like nursing, you're a white man, that's considered diverse, right? Because it's largely a lot of white women, right? So in context, for example, in planning, we have an Indigenous community planning program successfully running for several years now. And that's a challenge, when you want to admit more Indigenous students, people of color, but when you have high school completion rates to be a problem, right? If people are not even finishing high school, never mind going to university to finish their bachelor's program, how can you even have representation in graduate school and in higher education in general? And so you really need to look at this interlocking, and intersectional ways of looking at not just at the hiring and the admissions, but also at the very foundational on the way we socialize children, the way we encourage families of color, new immigrants, refugees, Indigenous families, to support them really to succeed. And because I'm in education, and that's one concrete example that I can find, and really ensuring that our children stay in school. And how do we enable that? We can create enabling environments and policies to ensure that their family success is the success of children so that they can realize their dreams.
Make it affordable. And
Making it affordable. That's part of the enabling environment.
Yeah. And if I may just follow up on that very briefly, intersectionality only goes so far if systems don't exist to support the people who need to be in those positions, right? So when we talk about education, we have a situation in Canada where, many reserve communities don't have K through 12 education. So of course completion rates are terrible, right? It's a systemic issue. And so intersectionality is so important, it's important to look at where that becomes connected to the other systems that, I guess, interlock with intersectionality as well, right?
So how do you reach those people who are struggling with that, who don't have the education but have the ability to be a change maker?
Good question. I think that there are lots of different ways. I mean, we need to show people that we value different ways to be a leader and to be a change maker in the world, right? That it's not just potentially through obtaining a university education or becoming a professor or a lawyer, that there are all kinds of ways that their voices are valued. And so I think we've seen some amazing, like, community-led, on-the-ground projects throughout North America, involving, people of color or trans and two-spirit folks, or Indigenous people that come from community and are grassroots and are showing kids that they can be leaders and change makers in really important ways, even if they come from that place.
Responsibility also lies with communities themselves, also lies with the government, may it be civic government, provincial or federal. Everybody has to pull in and make sure that people that do not get the education, I mean, the education system here for people who are coming from outside find admission in colleges, whereas kids who are studying here have to have a higher, GPA, to get into university, right? I mean, and so those people, number one, it's very expensive. Number two, it's very difficult to get in. And number three, there are very few places. So I think all levels of government and communities have got to pull in together to make sure that people who are bright and can get somewhere should be able to get somewhere.
One more question here, and then we're going to go to the audience. So if you have any questions that you're thinking about, get them in now. Cicely, do you have an example of a story that you've seen that's inspired you and demonstrated the potential of our society or our humanity? And if you need to think about it, if somebody else wants to jump in, that's...
I think what has most recently impacted me, and doesn't really have a happy ending, but I think the story in general is inspiring, is of Erica Garner. She was the daughter of Eric Garner, who was murdered by police officers, I think, 2 years ago. And his last words were famously, "I can't breathe." And so that's a phrase that became used among many activists to draw to light the ways in which violence is used disproportionately against black bodies. So his daughter became an activist, kind of not really by choice, but kind of by being thrown into that. And she was a single mom, and she gave everything to the movement. And I think it was so incredible to watch her journey. And she organized a rally every Tuesday and every Thursday for 2 years after her father had passed. And the way she was able, I think it's interesting you mentioned, like, no university background, no, like, white collar job, a young black single mother living in the United States, someone who is often, like, not given the same resources, the same respect as so many other people, yet she had, I think she felt so empowered by her community that she was able to do that. She was able to use that grief to be able to create something beautiful. And sadly, she passed away of a heart attack at only 36. And so you can see the impact that that kind of work can have on people. And I think, some people might call that natural causes, but ultimately you can see how her lived experience led to a similar demise as her father. And I think, as I mentioned, although it's sad, I think what she did and the way she lived out her life and the way she dedicated everything, her entire being, to activism, I think, that had a profound change and was really inspiring.
Really showing that if you don't have the means or the resources, that you still can be a change maker.
For sure.
Okay. Anybody else want to say anything before we get to?
I do have, you know, we are in a way all change makers in big and small ways, in our own personal lives and our family. And I always ask myself, you know, what kind of a mother, teacher, mentor, and an ancestor would I'd like to be, you know, remembered. And being an educator, it's built into the work that we do in a way to be a change maker. And so I'd like to tell stories of two former students as a transnational subject, one in the Philippines and one when I was already teaching here in Canada. Because the change maker possibilities of an educator, of a teacher, is really great, built into the job. So I'm recruiting you now to those who are looking for careers. So the first one is actually one of my very first, you know, student who is now Consul General of the Philippine Consulate Office here.
Beautiful.
And, you know, succeeded as a lawyer and worked in the diplomatic corps for a long time. And I must say that the change that Honourable Consul near Frank Ferrer brought to the Philippine Consulate. And, you know, he might not put it this way, but I consider it really change in the form of user engagement design principles, where basically looked at what do Filipinos in Vancouver, you know, need, and redesign the office in remarkable ways. Even just the design of the office was really user-friendly and brought consular services down to the community by going through nonprofits and community organization to actually deliver consular services. So that's one of my first batch of students in the Philippines when I was teaching at the University of the Philippines. And then my first student who had the courage to approach this newbie on campus to be her master's student was the late Rebecca Tarbotan, who was then working in Ladakh, India, working for the Women's Alliance in Ladakh to look at what we might call a co-op, you know, program, linking volunteers from the north with the traditional agricultural practices that the Women's Alliance in Ladakh are doing for them to really think about food security and how looking at traditional farming practices can perhaps make us less dependent on these expensive farm inputs that we're using. So then she moved on to work for the International Society for Ecology and Culture in London, and then moved her way to become program officer for Rainforest Alliance Network in San Francisco.
Wow.
And she was, as then executive director, managed to get a number of corporations to avoid procuring rainforest paper. Right? In this day and age with all the recycling, I was surprised to know that we're still procuring pulp and paper from the rainforest. And if you had a chance to watch on Netflix Dirty Business on the coal industry, she was featured there, and before her untimely death, in a tragic swimming accident in Mexico, she was lobbying Citibank and other key players in the financial industry that were funding and bankrolling the coal industry. And Rebecca, from her training at the School of Community Regional Planning and at UBC, and all her work experience, was able to demonstrate not just her personal leadership, but that empowerment-based leadership that she had demonstrated wherever she goes. And boy, I miss her. Neil is still around in here and, in the consulate office, but I, certainly miss Rebecca and always remember my buena mano at the School of Community Regional Planning.
Thank you, Nora. We're going to move on to some of the audience questions now. And the one that everybody wants to know about, it's the most popular. What small actions or habits do you credit for your trajectory to becoming a leader? Changemakers, we'll start with you.
Oh my God. I think, I believe that when you come to this plane, the goddess has already decided what you're going to be doing, and you're given opportunities. And it is up to you to grab that opportunity and go ahead, forge ahead, or miss that opportunity. The universe always tries to make sure that whatever you've dreamt, whatever you want to do, that it comes true. So I think dreaming that I want to do this is very important. So if you dream, then your dreams will come true. And I believe in that, and I think you should believe in that because the universe is ready to grant anything that you want. Good dreams, though.
Well said. Cicely?
I guess I try to, as an activist, it's important for me to embody the things that I tell other people to do, I suppose. And so for me, that really looks like, where do I get things from, what do I consume, and really paying attention to that idea. And I remember on International Women's Day, the first one I ever celebrated here at UBC, one of the staff from the Equity and Inclusion Office actually said to me, we were ordering some flowers, and she said, if we're celebrating International Women's Day, shouldn't we make sure that the flowers are coming from somewhere where the women are paid well to pick them? Because we had thought, let's just go get them from No Frills or whatever, and we hadn't considered it at all as young budding feminists, and it hadn't occurred to us this idea of how are women living in other parts of the world, and that was really a wake-up call for me to think if we're celebrating International Women's Day here in Canada and we wanted to do something nice like handing out flowers to people on campus, how can we also make sure that the repercussions of that are not negatively impacting other women? And so so I always remember that and try to make sure that my actions can positively impact the most people and avoid harm coming to the most marginalized.
And that's always in the back of your head. Mm-hmm. Patricia?
I'm going to echo both of those things and then add, because I think that's a good thing to do. So yes, dreaming, absolutely, and yes, living with integrity and knowing that, I'm going to go back to an age-old feminist adage, the personal is the political, because it is. And also, I think having really great friends who inspire me and who constantly push themselves to do better and work harder and represent the people that they're fighting for and in a good way and do the good work. And having those people to talk with and be able to share ideas with and is a really important part of being able to go out into the world every day and do that work, I think, right? And also being able to, I don't know if you would call it, I was trying to think about this, am I an optimist or am I just a really hopeful realist? But having that hope, having that sense of you can change the world no matter how awful it seems, no matter how terrible it is, no matter what the latest news story about some terrible injustice is, that you can look at that and say, okay, I'm really angry right now, I'm really, really hurt, my heart is so sad, but tomorrow or later I'm going to get back to work, because change is possible, and really believing that, having that sense of belief and hope.
I love that. Nora?
I echo everything that's been said. I tell my students that feminism, good friends, good books, and yoga and meditation saved my life. I also learned, if you're a community activist, you easily get burned out. That if you really want to be effective and become effective in the work that you do, it's really important to keep yourself healthy and happy. Because if you're not healthy and happy, there's really nothing to hang on to if you want to continue on doing the work that you do. And so my small habits in the everyday, I think this is the question of the person. It's basically, every morning I do my stretches, quick, fast yoga, so to speak. And I really learned to do my breathing properly and get a good night's sleep, very important. And really be thankful. Being thankful and being optimistic and hopeful all the time, because it's really so easy to get depressed in this overwhelming systemic, right? Big issues that confront us. I still read the newspaper every day. I'm a news junkie. I listen to the CBC all the time, and great, and watch CNN, CBC, BBC, I could do my own pastiche of the news. So that's my oxygen. I'm actually a trained political scientist, so and that's where I got the habit. And reading good books, so I always like going to chapters. If I don't want to buy the book, I read it for free, and fast, right? Because I've used up my professional development funds, which maybe probably should increase, right? So I enjoy the little things in life. And though my children will probably not agree that I am not being the change you want to be because, Mom, you repeat yourself. Mom, you state the obvious all the time in communication with teenagers, right? I try as much as possible to speak from the heart, because the tendency for academics is really to just speak from our, the head, right? But it's really like having that energy flow and checking in. Does this resonate with my values? Is it okay with my gut to do this? Who are you? Why are you doing this? Right? Why do you want to empower strangers? Right? All those questions, going back to the basics, almost existential questions that sometimes I ask every day just to check in. So those are some of my habits.
And it sounds like that's sort of a theme, checking in with yourself, making sure that you know what you want, what's important, and going after that, whether it's small or big. Many people experience concern about not knowing what their singular passion is. Can you speak to times in your lives where the path wasn't obvious? Sushma, I don't know if we should come to you because I feel like you've known what you wanted to do for so long.
Yeah, I think, but I think when you know what you want in life, and it falls in your lap, you're the luckiest person in the world. But then it's up to you to sort of see whether you can influence others. I know that through my work within the South Asian community, there have been many young women and men who have watched me on television or heard me on radio and have told their parents that this is the profession that I would like to go into, because in the South Asian community, you either become a doctor, or you become a lawyer, or you become, that's it, doctor and lawyer, right? Or engineer.
Engineer, yeah.
Engineer, right. No broadcasting, right? So I think I do feel that that yes, I have been lucky enough to find a job that I love very much, and I'm 72 years old and I still work 7 days a week, and I'll continue working till I drop dead. But I think it's, if people see me, I'm happy doing what I am doing, then probably they will see, this is not a bad profession. I mean, you love doing what you do, don't you?
I love it.
Yeah.
And I saw you when I was young as well. So. Do any of you have experiences of where you didn't know at all? Patricia, you kind of spoke to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So right after high school, I was convinced that I was going to be a writer, and like a creative writer, right? So I went to Mount Royal College, as it was then, to take their creative writing program, and promptly dropped out to start a theater company, because I'd been acting for a few years at that point, and I had a huge desire, burning passion to pursue an acting career, but decided that maybe also in doing that I could be a writer, because I could, directors are kind of like writers, and if I had my own theater company, then I could also help people by providing them it was a community theater, so that way they would have a portal to from high school theater to some kind of experience before they went on to do professional theater. And so, I was like, this is perfect. This combines all the things that I want to do. I have so much passion for theater and for acting, and so started a theater company. And that theater company actually continued to be successful for a long time. I was only involved with it for a couple of years, because at one point I was dealing with some personal issues, and there was a hostile takeover of the board of directors. So it was a very horrible moment in my life where this terrible thing happened to me, where my theater company was taken over. But from there, I sort of went back to my desire to think about not so much writing myself, but literature and how much I loved it. Literature and poetry, good books are really important to me. So went back to university to study literature, which I did for 2 years before deciding that that was not exactly what I wanted to do at all. And so decided to study Indigenous history and women's studies. But I was at the University of Calgary, which at the time did not have a robust program in either of those things. And so did a couple years there before transferring to the University of Victoria. So my path was long and windy. Clearly, I have a master's degree in history. So, it took me a while to figure out that maybe being a lawyer was something that I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure when I was doing my master's degree how I wanted to go on and use all the learning that I had done at that point. All I knew is that I really wanted to work on issues involving Indigenous women in Canada and bringing to light the various issues that impact their lives every day. And so when I went to law school, it was because I wanted to actually go on and do policy work. I had no interest in being a lawyer when I first started law school, but then I fell in love with the practice of law when I went and did the clinic that I'm now the academic director of in my second year of law school. So yeah, my path was windy. I had tons of passion through all of it, but it was always directed at sort of various different things. And at the end of the day, though, it was always clear to me that I wanted to do good work helping people, and that my feminist politics and my experiences as a Métis person informed those things in a way that were important to me, in the way that I brought to bear every day in my life in the work that I did, whether it was running a theater company or whether it was studying, history. So
if people aren't sure, don't give up.
That's right.
Go through the long,
Yes.
winding path.
Yeah, as long as you're, and all those experiences, by the way, are useful to me to this day. Every single one of those things is so useful for the work that I do every day. When I go to court and I'm actually in court, it's a performance. All of those things that I learned help me with that. When I'm sitting here having amazing conversations with people in an environment like this, all of the things that I learned along the way and all the work that I did, both as a community activist or in community theater, all of that matters and comes to bear all the time. So yeah, don't give up, explore your passions, they'll lead you to exciting places.
And so Anita, I just want to say, when I was in grade 4, I told myself, I don't want to be a teacher. And if I'd only had followed my passion, I would be just concentrating on mothering, reading poetry, reading the newspaper, and gardening. I wanted to be a lawyer after university, but I really was looking for signals. Signals, whether it was by force of circumstance, political signals, and at the time, law was being used as a tool of oppression under the Marcos dictatorship. And I know I was probably going to be assassinated if I become a labor lawyer or a human rights lawyer. And becoming an educator was in a way a refuge from these turbulent times. And that's why I ended up being academic. So exploring and understanding really what you like and not like, as I said earlier, but also knowing where your talents and your interests lie, but also knowing the constraints under which you operate, which is really my way of saying, what are the signals being sent to you here? What's your performance evaluation look like? You have to put it in professional terms. So
Really think about that. Okay, we have time for one more question, and this is a little bit different from what we've talked about today. Where are all the men tonight? In this room of 400 plus people, I don't know if there's quite 400, but I see 20 men. How do we get more men, more diversity in the business of making change? Cicely, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
How
I don't
to
know.
bring men in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think
Into making change and facilitating change.
I think it starts at home. Parents have got to teach their boys and girls to be equal and be passionate about everything that matters to them and the world. And I think it starts at home. So if parents are bringing up their children equally, why are women so passionate and men are not, right, about issues? Because they are taught to be, oh, don't cry, you have to be, strong and so on and so forth. And I think if that sort of changes and we live in a world where feminism isn't just a thing that is for just women, but everybody thinks in a feminist way, I think the world would be a happier place to live. Women wouldn't have so many problems, and men would come to these gatherings then.
I mean, I agree. We have to raise feminist sons.
Yes.
And feminist daughters. And I'd like us to see how we can work with men as allies in the work that we do as changemakers, as activists, as scholars, because there are a lot of good men who like to contribute to the causes that we believe in. And, because we were talking about intersectionality earlier, I really wish that we could have a counterpart, a parallel, #MeToo, movement to deal with the microaggressions, for example. And it could be perpetrated by, people of all genders and sexual orientation. The racial and gender stereotyping that we have. So I think from small actions like that to the broader, how we can have allies from all genders and people from all walks of life in transforming policies and institutions. So it really has, as we say, a bottom-up and a top-down, working together in order to create this change. And men are part of policy-making institutions, so they can't be left behind.
Yeah, I think that it's important to think about the ways that maybe the 20 men in this room, I don't know, maybe it starts with you. Maybe the 20 men in this room are men who can step into their own leadership and change-making roles in terms of talking to other men about the issue of, heteronormative masculinity and how it's toxic for men, how it doesn't do anyone any good. It's not a healthy thing for anyone who experiences it. And men, there needs to be men talking to men about that and taking on that issue and saying, we're not going to live this way as men. We don't want this. We're gonna unravel this thing and look at how we need to be intersectional in our approach and how because this isn't good for us. We're not feeling it. It doesn't feel good when we have to walk through the world and deal with heteronormative masculinity in this world and its and its issues. So.
Okay. We have time for one final thought, I think. Yeah, from all of you. Nora, why don't we start with you? Just a final thought on tonight's discussions.
Oh. That's the hardest question. And
Should we come back to you, Nora?
well, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Get back to me and I'll think about it.
All right. Well, my final thought is that it's making change in the world is all about you. In the same way that I just said that it's all about those 20 men potentially. It's about each one of you as individuals and the work that you do in the world, engaging with each other every day. And I can't emphasize enough how much we are all capable of helping to make change. We're all change makers, we're all leaders, and we all have amazing attributes and talents and thoughts and contributions to make. So, so do it.
I think my final thought is going back to our brief conversation about intersectionality and what does that mean. And I think, for me as a Black Lives Matter activist, it's always important to take that ideology back to its roots and acknowledge that it did come from Black feminism, from Kimberly Crenshaw, and thinking about how can we actively honor that history, and particularly within academia, how can we shift the narrative so that people of color specifically feel more safe and feel more able to take up space within the university? Because, I know definitely in my experience, I think I only had maybe 2 or 3 professors who were people of color during my time here, and only one was a woman of color. I was doing European studies, but anyway.
That changes a little bit.
But that really changed how I accessed the space and what I thought I was capable of, and when I thought I could put up my hand in class, or when I thought my voice would be listened to. And there was only this one woman of color who actively said, we're going to make space for students of color to have their voices heard and to speak up now. And if you're the kind of person who usually says a lot, maybe be quiet this lesson, because there's a lot of people who have internalized racism and have internalized oppression to believe that they don't deserve to speak and they don't have a voice. And that really shifted my university experience, and then shifted how I became to be part of activism, and also shifts how I view Black Lives Matter as probably the most intersectional Black liberation movement that there has been. Because a lot of people ask me what would Martin Luther King think about Black Lives Matter? And it's a very tricky question, because on one hand, I'm sure he would be disappointed that we still have to do this work, but also proud that we're doing it. But then at the same time, he was a Baptist Republican from the South. I don't know how he would feel about queer women leading the Black liberation movement. So I think for me, intersectionality is so important in that aspect, that Black Lives Matter really is that platform for not only Black folks, but Black folks in the margins of the margins. So Black women, Black queer and trans folks, Black folks living with different abilities. And I think that's what really excites me about the movement and makes me passionate about it, is that it's a space for everyone, and it's a space for Black folks of all backgrounds, and I would like to see that in different spaces and different movements as well.
Thank you. Oh, Nora's ready.
Nora's ready.
She's ready.
Three things I
I'll
want to
wait.
say. Number one, the importance of persistence. Really never give up. If you want to continue the work that you want to do as change maker. The second one is on empathy and reflexivity. Whatever it is that you do first applies to yourself. You know, the cliched but true saying, be the change you want to see in the world, you know, it's important for developing that reflexivity. And I think thirdly, building our capacities for leadership and leadership development to contribute to good change. In particular, so that we can use that form of effective leadership for creating a political and economic system, especially in this day and age, where we can attract the best, talented, competent people to create that enabling environment for human beings to flourish. And not only to think of changing the world for our children and our grandchildren, but also about our planet, our earth, the land and the water bodies, the non-human plants and animals. That is not just for people, but also for the built and natural environments in which we live in.
Thank you, Nora. And Shushma, last but not least.
So final thoughts, right? I think through our, and I can only take it into my profession, journalism and broadcasting, to be able to talk about topics that are difficult to talk about, to be able to talk about them with balance, presenting both sides, to be able to be honest enough to say, yes, I am wrong, and you're right. To be able to look at a situation and empathize and support, to be able to stand up and say, I believe in this and I will continue believing in it. And if people don't believe in you, present your point of view, but also respect their point of view. So broadcasting has a huge responsibility of being unbiased, and that particular unwritten promise that you make when you become a broadcaster, that you will not take any side, is very close to my heart. And I feel that if all of us could do that in our private life as well, life would be so much easier to lead. Difficult sometimes, but easier to lead. Because you could sleep at night without, thinking that you were a jackass.
On that note, that is all the time we have for this evening.